The release of version 2.0 gave us brand new Echo Sonata effects to try out. Considering the fact that we were giving access to a brand new region, you would think that majority of these new Echo sets would have great synergy with new characters that belongs to Rinascita, but that's not actually the case because quite a decent amount of these new Echo sets synergize well with characters that were released before version 2.0. If you're new here on the channel, welcome to another breakdown video where I test new features that have been implemented in the game for a god-awful amount of time to help you make some informed decisions, making your account better overall. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down all of the new Sonata effects that was introduced in version 2.0. As always, if this video proves helpful or enjoyable in any way, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon because it helps me out tremendously. Let's begin with the Empyrean Anthem set. Before version 2.0, the best Sonata effects for any sub-DPS character in the game was the Moonlit set regardless of the assigned role that a particular sub-DPS character may have, which did not necessarily provide any buffs for the equipped character, so their damage potential was pretty low. The Empyrean Anthem set solves this problem by increasing the personal damage of coordinated attack damage dealers like Jeji and Yinlin, while providing a damage buff to your main DPS character that you run them with at the same time. The 2-piece effect increases energy regen by 10%. The 5-piece effect will increase your coordinated attack damage by 80%. The best part is that it also increases the active resonator's attack by 20% for 4 seconds upon dealing a critical hit with the equipped character's coordinated attacks. So when you compare this set to Moonlit Clouds, the only damage buff that you'll be losing is the 12% damage boost and the 2.5% attack to your main DPS when you trigger an outro skill. But the Hecate 4-cost Echo of the Empyrean Anthem set grants you a 40% increase in coordinated attack damage to the equipped character, which begs the question, is the 120% coordinated attack damage increase of your sub-DPS character worth more than the 12% damage boost and the 2.5% attack from Impermanence Heron to your main DPS? Well, stick around because that's exactly what we're going to find out. Before the damage test, let's take a look at Hecate's special ability. The Echo skill activates 3 of these red blades that spins around your character, dealing 9 instances of damage, which lasts for about 2 seconds. If you parry attacks with it, it will reset the 2 seconds duration. It's best not to focus on this Echo skill too much because of the low damage scaling and very short duration. However, the damage could be decent with a Havoc damage build, but since we currently do not have coordinated attack damage dealers of the Havoc element in the game, it will contribute to a very non-significant portion of your overall damage even if you land a parry with the Echo skill. So your main focus should be on the second part that buffs coordinated attacks by 40%. Keep in mind that we are mainly going to focus on if the damage that we get from coordinated attacks makes any difference to your team's overall damage, so I won't be using the Nightmare Tempest Mephis, which is also part of the Empyrean Anthem set. I'll be using Yinlin, Zhang Liao, and Showkeeper for this showcase. My Yinlin stats for Moonlit are 73% crit rate on 237% crit damage with attack and electro damage bonus 3 cost. The stats for Empyrean Anthem is 63% crit rate on 256% crit damage with attack and electro damage bonus 3 cost. Critical rate won't be a problem here because I'll be using Showkeeper. Here's a first rotation showcase for both sets on Yinlin. From the rotation showcase, you can see that Zhang Liao's nuke damage was 173k and Yinlin's coordinated attacks was 4.3k on hit. It's later dropped to 4.1k because we lost the 24% attack from Yinlin's weapon passive, which lasts for only 5 seconds. For the Empyrean Anthem build, Zhang Liao's nuke damage was 164k damage and Yinlin's coordinated attack damage was 7.9k, which later dropped to 7.7k because we lost the 24% attack buff from Yinlin's weapon. The Liberation nuke damage dropped because of the 12% damage boost and the 2.5% attack that we lost from the Moonlit set, which might not seem significant at first glance, but the buff that we lost from Impermanence Heron applies to every type of damage from Zhang Liao, not just his Liberation nuke damage. So I did 2 runs with both sets to see if the coordinated attack buff from Empyrean Anthem really makes a difference on the same floor, where in both runs, Zhang Liao was not able to crit one of his Liberation nuke, which makes up a large portion of his personal damage, keeping the battle conditions as close as possible. The time remaining for the Moonlit set was 3 minutes 16 seconds, while the time remaining for the Empyrean Anthem set was 3 minutes 13 seconds. But of course, I did not forget about Yoo-Hoo. Using her as the dedicated healer in the team made Yinlin's coordinated attack so much stronger, dealing around 12k damage. However, Yoo-Hoo's playstyle is rather clunky, her buffing capability is rather limited to coordinated attack damage dealers, and her concerto energy regeneration is not that decent compared to Verena and Showkeeper, so only use Yoo-Hoo if you plan on playing Yinlin and Jeji as a main DPS. So after hours of testing, here's the final verdict. If you already have a cracked Moonlit set, I recommend that you use that on Yinlin and Jeji as a sub DPS for now, because your team's overall damage difference between the two sets is not that significant, so you can decide not to farm for the Empyrean Anthem set for now if you don't want to. I strongly believe that the Empyrean Anthem set was specifically made for a main damage dealer who does coordinated attacks, which we will probably get in Rinascita. Now let's take a look at the Eternal Radiance set. The Nightmare Morning Ace is the only focus echo that belongs to this set, which is a summoning type echo. It deals additional damage if Spectral Frazzle is applied on the enemy. The 2-piece set will increase spectral damage by 10%. The 5-piece set, however, is where things get really interesting. The first part of the 5-piece set will increase your crit rate by 20% for 15 seconds if your character applies the Spectral Frazzle debuff on an enemy. I already covered this in my recent video, but here's how it looks when Spectral Frazzle is applied on the enemy. You'll see this spectral icon on the enemy and they will take damage over time. The crit rate buff is the most broken part of this Sonata effect because you can invest only in crit damage if you have crit rate stats on all your echoes. Let me use my Camellia build as an example. I currently have a total of 38% crit rate from substats on my echoes, and you can get the same stats on the Eternal Radiance set after about a week of farming. Getting the 20% crit rate from the Eternal Radiance set will add up to 58% crit rate if we assume that you have 38% crit rate from only substats. Pair the wielder of this set with Showkeeper and you'll be looking at 70% crit rate excluding the crit stats from your forecast and your weapon. If the wielder turns out to be Spectral Rover, her S1, which everyone can get for free, grants her 15% crit rate when she uses her Forte skill, resulting in an 85% crit rate excluding crit stats from your weapon and forecast echo. So you can see that with this set, you can easily use a crit damage weapon with a crit damage forecast echo just because of the 20% crit rate that you get from the 5-piece effect to do more damage. Also keep in mind that if the user of this set has crit rate on their skill tree, it even contributes to more crit rates that you can get from the overall stats increase. The second part of the 5-piece effect will increase your spectral damage bonus by 15% if you attack an enemy with 10 stacks of Spectral Frazzle. If you're using Spectral Rover, here's how you can do that. Rover's Forte skill applies 2 stacks of Spectral Frazzle along with Shimmer, which reduces the rate at which the enemy loses the Spectral Frazzle debuff with time. Her Liberation also applies 6 stacks of Spectral Frazzle, but it doesn't include Shimmer. Per my testing, Shimmer only lasts for about 9 seconds, so when you use her Forte skill to apply the Shimmer effect, you have about 9 seconds until the enemy starts losing Spectral Frazzle stacks in a 3 seconds interval. What you need to do to maintain 10 stacks of Spectral Frazzle is to intro with Rover from your sub DPS, which will fill half of her Forte stacks. Use her Forte skill for her crit rate buff and apply 2 stacks of Spectral Frazzle. And use her Liberation, giving you a total of 8% Spectral Frazzle stacks. Keep in mind that at this point you still have Shimmer on the enemy. You have 9 seconds to use a second Forte skill, which will apply an additional 2 stacks of Spectral Frazzle along with Shimmer and resets the 9 seconds duration until you can lose a Spectral Frazzle stack. Spectral Rover's skill has only 6 seconds cooldown, which fits well within the 9 seconds Shimmer duration. So as long as you use your Forte skill when it's available to you, while you have at least half of her Forte stacks, you will never lose the 15% spectral damage bonus until you outro from the field, as you can see from this clip right here. Now let's cover Midnight Veil. The Nightmare Impermanence Heron and the Lorelei Overlord Echo are the 4-cost echoes that belong to this Sonata effect. The 2-piece set will increase havoc damage by 10%, and the 5-piece set will deal 480% havoc damage to surrounding enemies and grants the incoming Resonator 15% havoc damage bonus. The only character in the game that can use this set at the moment is Danjin, so I did a damage comparison between using Danjin with Midnight Veil and Sanhua with Moonlit Clouds. The results were a bit surprising. My Camellia stats include the Emerald of Genesis weapon with 67% crit rate on 260% crit damage and double havoc damage bonus on the 3 costs. Camellia's ephemeral Forte damage in a Sanhua Moonlit team was 155k damage, while the Liberation damage was 96k. On the other hand, Camellia's ephemeral Forte skill damage in a Midnight Veil dungeon team was 120k, while the Liberation damage was 99k. Keep in mind that my dungeon is not sequence 6 yet, so Sanhua had a bit of an upper edge in the showcase. But even without the 20% attack buff from Danjin, the ephemeral Forte skill is a bit low considering the fact that we have 23% havoc damage amplification from Danjin's outro skill and 15% havoc damage bonus from the 5-piece effect of the Midnight Veil. So if you plan to pull for Rocha, you can begin farming for this set, but if that does not apply to you, stick with Sanhua for now. For Frosty Resolve, there's not that much of a damage comparison to make because it can only be used by Carlotta at the current state of the game, so I'm sure a lot of you guys have already obtained cracked ones for Carlotta. Ling Yang would have been the perfect candidate to use this set along with Carlotta because you can cancel his second basic attack in his flying state to use his enhanced Mountain Roamer resonance skill from the Diligent Practice passive, but he can only maintain the full buff of the 5-piece effect for only 5 seconds. While his flying mode in his Liberation state lasts for 10 seconds, so Freezing Frost is still the best alternative. For the Tide Breaking Courage Sonata effect, no one synergizes with the 5-piece effect, so feel free to ignore it for now. That will be all for the version 2.0 Sonata effects breakdown, and let me know if I missed anything. If YouTube gets this right, you should like this video that pops up on your screen, so be sure to give it a watch and join the Discord community. Catch you guys in the next one. Bye bye.